And we're live. Hey,
Hello.
Brian.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good.
Good, good. Good things are rolling. It's great to see everybody. This is very cool. I'm Brian Alexander. I'm tuning in here, joining in from West Michigan. And we're going to talk about something that might seem dry and sleepy and technical on the surface of it, but I guarantee it won't be that way, or I hope it won't be that way. And this is all like a visually based presentation. So I'm going to click over to that. Um, boop, hopefully. Share. Does that look right?
That looks great. And let's see, you may go to present. Are you in presentation mode?
I'm going to do
You can
that.
do that. If not, and while Brian's doing that, I don't know, all of you should check out all of his social media. His work is just beautiful. And he was the Guthman Prize winner from Georgia Tech and he can talk a little bit about it, but I'll let him, I don't want to steal his thunder, but I want to make sure that I shared that, and then I'll
that's cool.
mute.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm a combination artist, product designer, experienced design person, and so I deal with products and events and processes and ergonomics, which is basically fitting machines to people and vice versa, is one of those topics, and it's a pretty broad topic actually. And I'm going to kind of come at this from the standpoint of what's useful to people that do what we do, not so much what I would do with a client, say. So it's all kind of about the application. Um, and yes, been making things for a long time. This is a version of me with hair, and this is quite a while ago. And but essentially, I've been doing the same sorts of activity. That is free range feral cat creating things without asking, which is kind of a lot of the essence of making. And then over time, actually getting jobs and being in the professional environment, and have done that for now some 35-ish years, building things and creating things that kind of bridge the art world and the product design and development world. So on the product side, that's everything from amusement rides to instruments to furniture and so on, everyday objects. And then on the art side, it's pretty close to limitless. It's most media, and if I don't know it, I try to learn it and express what needs to be done in that media. So I put this image in here. This is taken from a 35 millimeter slide back in the old days. It's also, well, this is well over 30 years old, but this is a instrument that I made a very long time ago with an X-Acto knife with a razor blade and a tree from our property that was hit by lightning. I keep images like this around. I don't really show them much, just because everything starts somewhere, and I carved that out of hand, which now you look at it and you think, well, that would be CNC laser, or we would print part of that, or whatever. You certainly wouldn't start with a chunk of solid wood, but I love these things as reference points, and I very much love all instruments in all forms. And definitely respect and nod to anyone who's ever made anything over time in terms of the tools, whether it was software or hardware or a lathe or whatever they had over the years. And the reason we are here, thanks for tuning in again, is I kind of took a cut at a specific layer of information that I think is relevant to people who both perform with what they make, which on one hand sounds like that would be a narrow group of people, but on the other hand, that's what happens when you make dinner for your family, or where you do this a lot of times in a lot of different forms. But it's, I would say, somewhat atypical to design something and then use it. So what I will offer here is, in true maker fashion, it's a kit. It's in kit form. These are concepts and higher level concepts. I don't mean high as in difficult. I mean higher level concept, which you're going to do what you want to do with it. Like all good kits, you open the box, you pull out 3 things, you throw 2 away, you keep the one, and you do something with the one that it wasn't meant to do. That's kind of our tradition. And I know it pretty well. But the topic is ergonomics. This is my favorite ergonomic human. People usually show, yeah, well, we'll get to a picture of that, but the anthropometric human and the length of their arm and leg and everything. But this, of course, is a shot from Metropolis. And whenever I think about machines using people or people using machines, this guy always comes to mind. Foretold of many interesting things in the 20s, more true than we know, although it's less physically oriented now. It's mostly in the mind, but definitely relevant. And a lot of the topic centers around what I mentioned before, which is just the fit of people using machines, which seems really obvious and like it doesn't require much thought. But I guess what comes to mind usually is a knob is this big, therefore it generates that much force. This pot is that easy to turn. This thing is the wrong color contrast, so I can't read it. It's very much at the surface usability questions. Um, and we will touch on some of that. But what I'm getting at here has to do with a long-standing, I hope you see that image change, a long-standing kind of effect where we have created things, meaning we as in humans in general, we put them out in the world, whether we share two of them or whether we make thousands. And then those things change people's behaviors, and that circulates back through to the next set of choices that someone will make in the world, whether it was what was required to drive to work or log on to see something. All of that is colored by what we make and what we put in the world. And a lot of what happens when it comes to music and people, especially once you add electricity, is a thing called static fatigue, which you will know from spending your day staring at a screen and then getting up and feeling sort of out of it. And there's no great cure for that offhand other than switching task as much as possible and switching context. But the root of that oddity has to do with this. This is an image I put together a couple of years ago. So all these numbers on here are off by probably 3 years or 2 years for NobCon, which was all synthesizer humans or that type of human. And what this is getting at here is that over on the left side, you can see there were bone flutes and cave paintings and things that came about quite a while after there were anatomically modern humans. But then it went for this huge stretch into over on the right-hand side where there's things like texting or the web in general, or the internet. And that's like the thickness of a piece of paper compared to how many times people have replicated themselves. And the reason that's relevant is because in all the generations of people from that long stretch of time up to the really short period of time where technology and the industrial age happened, that's all hardwired in most people. Um, and by hardwired, I mean there are things humans will collectively react to and what kind of predictive behavior that come out in different ways. But essentially, every lifetime conditions a person. If you experience something as a child, it kind of sticks with you for the most of your life. And then if you have children, then some of that info genetically and epigenetically retriggered is part of their wiring and goes on and on and on. Every time there's a copy of a human, there's some behavioral conditioning that got hardwired in. So when you have thousands and thousands of years of hardwired, and you just have a handful of generations where you even had electricity, let alone the pervasive use of apps or other technology, things we haven't even used yet or only have concepts of. Basically, what happens is you have all this history that sort of drives, is at the root of behavior, which you can see in unfortunate behavior, especially. It's very clear. And we have a conscious mind, which has choices, and we use that to navigate our world, but we have a real strong hardwired base. Also, a little split to touch on here is, we'll just call it making. That is doing what you want to do, making what you want to make, and just freestyle doing it. You usually have some sort of acquired skill set, which may or may not have something to do with product development or writing code or machining things or welding things or something. There's usually some in towards making, and making usually happens in the shadow of other things. Sometimes making is all that people do. But I put these two here just to let you know that I kind of on a daily basis, I'm kind of in the things on the right hand side, but in a life sense, I'm on the left hand side. And the left hand side of making that sort of chunk of cheese, maybe perhaps makes music, or maybe that's a bar of gold. I don't know. It's just a product icon, instrument icon. Um, that is subject to things that everybody deals with across the board and have done so for many, many years, like, say, physics. If something, you put something together and it snaps and falls in half. You needed some more money to make the thing you have. You're making the thing in the middle of the night and you don't have time. You have resourcing, you have knowledge issues, but everything is in a sort of unit of one because you're making it mostly, usually, unless you had product development on your mind in the first place, you're making it to achieve some kind of dream that you saw, and that is going to basically get you where you're going. You might get it halfway done and go, aha, but now this, and chuck the whole thing and make another. But because you're working at a unit of one, the things you need and have access to are really only limited by your own network and your own knowledge and your own skills. The stuff on the right is, well, I guess it has two things at the root of it. One is money, monetization. If you can't make money doing the thing you're doing, you'll find people aren't interested very quickly. And the other is the legal side of things, which is why there's so many codes and standards around material use and safety, is because if you make 90,000 of something and put it out in the world and somebody gets hurt, then it's like a problem. So you have all these various codes and standards to help give structure to the process. And usually also on the right hand side is there's sort of a person or a group of people per topic, versus on the left, the thing I love about it anyway is like you are the one, you're the sole author, you're all there is to think about. You can sweep the floor, design the thing, do the graphics, paint it, play it, and on the right, that's all divided up amongst dozens of people usually. But the part I want to touch on is down here at the bottom, which I just highlighted in red, which is usability. There's a whole bunch of things in that category on the right that are really handy to at least understand in principle when it comes to making, and they're of personal benefit. Really, it's not a industry thing, and it's not a safety thing. You don't have to do any of it. The idea was just to put this out um, there, and in the past, it's generated a lot of discussion. But basically, float this out as a series of thoughts and pieces, parts and pieces to build in that kit-like form to make sense of. So here's that image of this strange but frequent used Dreyfus charts, which is what I learned in school originally. And it's all about the fitment of humans in the scale and range of humans. And there's basically this is the physical side, which was the emphasis when I was in school a long time ago. But quickly and somewhat overlapping is a whole world of cognitive, which aligns more with what happens in the graphics and software world now. And this is kind of my own take and my own approach that I use, but just to, again, to float it out there. The cognitive really can't be separated from the physical. Sometimes those are two separate jobs, two separate groups of people sometimes. But really in life, you wouldn't actually separate those because the homeostasis being a biological term, humans and water and pretty much everything that has some sort of biological component to it has a balance point. And so part of what I'm going to get at here is that we have a balance point, and if you understand what is at play in terms of how we use our resources daily, how we think, how the physical world colors us and we color it, it can benefit you at the level of creating things and performing with them. So there's 6 pieces in the kit. These are those, and we'll just kind of come back to this image each time and highlight it. But it thematically, most things all tie into that kind of hardwired OS and lifetime learning bias. But you kind of see how that will go as we move. Flow and time, first one, now highlighted in red. 2 images to show here. These are characterizations at a high level, so there's no like actual numbers on this. This is just to give you a feel for it, although it is an aggregate of multiple works. But in blue is engagement, and engagement refers to how involved you are mentally, how much of your mental real estate is being taken up by a task. And we'll say for session, we'll say your, I guess for people that are more in the making realm, we'll say you're soldering or something or doing code, but then there other people are playing because they're really the same in terms of what they occupy, or they're very similar, they're not identical. And awareness is what's happening in the space that you are in. So what happens is in a session, start to finish, SF, it starts out and you're kind of, they refer to being cold, just like an instrument can be cold. But quickly you'll engage. Let's just say that's like an hour and a half, that first session. And once that starts to peak, your involvement emotionally with what you're doing, your awareness drifts off and it actually drops to a suboptimal, subnominal state, meaning that somebody might walk through the room you're in, or the temperature might drop 5 degrees, or you might have to go to the bathroom, or there might be all kinds of physical cues, environmental cues that would be happening, and you won't know about them because of your level of engagement. I'm sure people, I know I experience it every day, but I'm sure you've experienced being involved in a book or a show or something. It doesn't have to be necessarily be making, but it's a level of engagement basically detunes body awareness as well as environmental awareness. And so these happen in stints, which I think is no accident why so many things movies used to have a thing called intermission. If you're watching a live set or if you're in one, it's kind of like, okay, it's been about this long. It's time to take a break. Even in a work task, if you were doing bills one moment and doing a different task another, it's like, okay, time to take a break. That's a natural flow that things follow artificially or naturally. And so there's a recovery. Now, the recovery chunk is a given size. It's not going to be the same size as the session was, and you kind of regain your bounds. And for a while, awareness overtakes engagement, and then you might go on with your second set or more of the same tasks that you were doing. But what happens is you can kind of see as things drift to a not so beneficial point, and they start to crisscross each other to where you wouldn't have noticed something weird about your shoe or an itch you had, or your chair is pinching you or something. That stuff's not happening in session one. Session two is shorter with less effect, less beneficial effect, and it just goes on and on and on until you're this people that do all-nighters know that you'll get way late into the night and have these really long efforts with really mediocre results usually. Also, this is just beneficial in work life. It's beneficial in terms of how you want to plot where you want to put your quality time as a human, but essentially, whether you're a morning person or not, you have a good potential a potential peak after you've had your whatever your wake up routine is, and you're ready to mentally go. You're ready to make stuff. You're ready to do things. And that essentially dips. There's a lot of factors. I don't want to go into them here, but there's everything from food you're burning, your environment you're in, the task you're doing. But essentially, it just dips over time. That top row shows those little hypothetical sugar cube looking things like their energy units, which of course is not actually how it works, but it's just to represent that. There's just general depletion through the course of a day. And the reason I put this in here is because let's say X is you're going to decide whether to hire someone or not, or you're going to decide whether to spend a large sum of money on a new machine or something. It's something significant. If you make that decision midway in the morning when the curve, so to speak, looks that way versus in the afternoon, you're going to get a different result. And this is proven out in studies, various studies over time. But one that's notable is where they would have parolee meetings, part of a prison system. I'll leave out the source on that. But essentially deciding whether people could get out of jail or not early. And it turned out statistically, after going backwards in time for about 8 years, that you were statistically likely to stay in jail if your parole board meeting was in the afternoon. I'm sure people can relate to that. If somebody says, "Hey, we'll get on a call at 3:30," you're like, "Oh boy." Some people it doesn't affect, but on average, it definitely has an impact. So, high stakes decisions may be better around your peak energy times. And everybody's curvature is a little different on this. This is not 100%. Again, this is a stylized kind of to depict the idea. A mind-body-body-mind connection. This is, I'm not talking even this hour-ish to go through all the stuff in gray, but essentially the idea is this: there's things that you have opinions about. You see things and it colors your mental state. And then your mental state translates into your physical state. If you see something scary, even though it might be on a screen versus in life, your body will shift and have a variety of biologically based reactions to that. And if you do that a lot, which is related to PTSD and other such conditions, your body just sort of stays in that state. And the main point is that things you experience in the physical world can color your body. Your mind, then, if you say, I need to do this task, or I got to go pick someone up at work or whatever, you go to do that task and it may or may not be a problem, or it may be poorly executed because your body is sending the signals that something is either really right or really not good. A lot of times it's neutral, but that's not always the case. The body reaction, as measured by the appropriate technologies in an average person who gets a notice about a tax bill being overdue, is the same sort of reaction that you might have had seeing a bear in the woods. But your body doesn't care what the source was or the difference, and it changes radically how you process information. It also goes the other way. Things you will experience in the physical realm just through touch, like again, a poorly outfitted chair. The top example there is the pencil smile, which is a test that can be replicated. Of course, not once you talk about it very much, but people don't know what's going to happen. You can ask them a series of questions without the pencil in their mouth, and then ask a series of questions with the pencil, and carefully crafted test will usually yield pretty much the same result, and that is a level of optimism with the people that had the pencil. And that's because it's forcing a smile of sorts structurally in the face. And the body thinks, because you have, or the mind rather, well, both really, but the mind mostly, because you have a pencil in your mouth, it says, this is good news, regardless of the content. And so you make optimistic decisions. This is true of those other points there in gray. But interesting to know, because it has everything to do then with the physical state of your surroundings. Proprioception and expression. This is a fun one. Proprioception, if you're not familiar, is basically where your body parts are oriented in space and the neurological systems that help govern that. But for music people, it's pretty interesting, because if you consider in my little sketch here that blue dot is your mind, or the hub of most neural activity, that you will have a thought or you will utter something, and your body, sort of like a little puppet, will do certain things based on what you say. If you are depressed or you are unhappy about a situation, you'll be hunched over. If you're happy, your posture will be better. And the reason this is important is because in the wiring of the mind, your speech centers and gestural and other components of expression are all kind of overlapping, which is why some people tend to talk with their hands a lot, other people not so much. But if you held their hands, they can't talk as well. So that's part of the previous mind, body, body, mind thought. But I know that you can see this everywhere in the world, but it's important to know for your own benefit that this picture is sort of obscure, but basically, if people aren't using cruise control going down the highway, and if they are in some very engaged discussion with the passenger, which you can kind of see because I like to watch what's going on when I drive. I've seen people, I don't know if they were bickering or whether they were just very excited, but when they get excited, the car will go blowing by you at a high rate of speed. And as maybe the conversation, based on their facial expression and their gestures, as the conversation becomes more laborious or bogs into detail, they slow down and the car goes slower. And what's happening is this subtlety of having your foot on the accelerator isn't as well regulated as you think when you're engaged in certain mental tasks, especially a discussion with another person. They see it a lot with phone calls. You'll see people looking off into space, and they'll go speeding and then slowing down. Again, unless they're using cruise control. So these things sort of leak out of our actions. I worked on a study a while ago that basically sought to see how hard keyboards were being tapped and then cross-correlating that to the task they were doing, which was not done on the sly. It was all on the up and up. But basically, some people were just spirited tappers, but once everything was aligned and calibrated in the beginning, you could see their expression coming through what they did, which is kind of coming through their physical expression. And of course, there's this, which is well known and famous, and there's many stories and thoughts around, but essentially it wouldn't have been the same performance if you just kind of stand there looking off into the distance or doing the shoegazing thing, strumming away. The moment got heated, like anyone who's experienced time in a mosh pit will tell you, which I didn't enjoy, but I've done it. It just goes bananas. Sometimes things go at a fever pitch. Sometimes there's a correlation here, and sometimes there's not. But for our own purposes, you might consider just the mental note. If you do perform regularly, and talk to some people in this realm, some longtime professionals, some not, what exactly is the character of what you're doing, and is it in correlation with your content? So there's a content correlation, an expression correlation, and how that is perceived by other people. And there's also a mirror of that, or not a mirror, but a parallel, you could say, in the studio environment, where you have a process by which you make things. Even it doesn't matter if it's a kitchen table or you have a production facility. There's definitely a process, and the thing to note is the physicality, the outlay of tools, and what you're trying to achieve, are those things aligned with that expression? Because sometimes you can be basically impinged or defeated physically or by your own outlay of the layout of an environment, and it will suppress what you're doing. And you'll a lot of times, because this isn't a thing you have awareness with, like hunger, it's a behavioral pattern, parts of it anyway, and it can be hard to navigate. So this is just awareness. Postural cognitive alignment is literally that. Cognitive, here's the ergonomic person again, doing the typical thing you do. If you displays, keyboard, that whole deal, these were the kind of the old school optimals. They're still shown today, interestingly. And a couple things to note. One is you can fit perfectly with an environment that you've tuned to a person and really not have any better results. You can do it longer, but you're not necessarily making better work or better art, because it hits that balance point and it kind of disappears as a benefit. This is also in here because I show this. A lot of times people, and then I had these boxes in here as though they were kind of Eurorack modular kind of things, but they could be anything pretty much. There is an optimal outlay, and it essentially works in an arc, but it's two different arcs if you're standing and sitting, and if you're looking from above, it's two arcs from the point of rotation of your shoulders. All those things, though, seem to kind of point to you not moving, which isn't true. If this person is focused, if they're hunched, if they're depressed, if they're happy, if they're standing, this arc has to open and close, which I've worked on prototypes for, but this is not usually what's happening. But this is a far more optimal outlay of what you'll see most people deal with. And people have known this for a long time, based on scale. This is a watch company back many years ago, and in some senses still today, jewelers, other people who work on small components, rise the table up. Sorry, let me go back here. Not like this at all, but like this. And it's because of the scale of what they're dealing with. It isn't that this is ergonomic perfection, but it makes way more sense than this, which is what you see happen a lot in various genre of noise art and other things, is people are not at the proper height, and you can't do this very long, and on and on and on. What's happening without getting too heavy into detail, is when you're curled over like this, you compress the diaphragm, you can't get in as much oxygen, and yet you're having this kind of expressive explosion. So you're kind of jumping around, but everything you're touching is completely in the wrong place, and it's in a plane out away from you. Your sight line is wrong, et cetera, et cetera. And um, being kind of a furniture nerd that I am, the thing on the left is essentially an off-the-shelf dining kind of, I don't want to say disposable because they're pretty tough, but that is, both those things are at seated height. It's a folding leg table and another standard dining table. I throw this in there just as an example. It has that curvature to it. I made this to try out, and I've changed it a few times. Again, the idea is it was one thing at standing height, and it's another orientation in the range of sitting, and it basically that arc changes as it moves. This was just when I was in process with it, but I still use this today, at least for part of what I do. And it seems like kind of, again, sort of, I don't want to say so what, but kind of like, okay, sure. But it makes a huge difference if your sight line moves in an arc with the point of rotation and the force required to use patch cables and knob twiddle. It also is a thought or a good idea to maybe do at a high level a map of your process. And I don't mean a real, it's a schematic map. Just to say, I spend this much time in fab, I spend this much time in the design realm, I spend this much time playing, on and on and on. These are my activities. It's a little bit of an inventory. And the color code there is, am I standing or sitting when I do those things? Am I in the same room? Where am I? And that can help you to sort out, should anything in this arrangement be adjusted. Usually, sort of like the watchmaking women, they standing would be fine actually in that case, but there's a real tight time duration on those activities in terms of what they're doing. So, like for example, when I solder, I don't solder all day. I do it in stints and I break it up with other activities. And for me, I like to stand, but you don't have to. But variation in posture is a big deal. Knowing how many discrete activities you have in your workflow. Sometimes you just have two or one, or you just play. It's all over the place for everybody. But are there common tools and common character to each? Some things are good to sit down for and to be very sort of inwardly focused and cerebral and to take away as much outside distraction as possible. But only you know that. And it just comes from trial and error. Then there is alignment of context. This is an interesting one that gets skipped over a lot because similar to the analogy before about whether you're going to, whether you know, like if you get hungry, you get a signal. If you're tired, you get signals. When your context is off, you don't get many signals. You just get poor results and you don't usually know why you got them. A lot of people have a sense of it, of why it might be, but they don't necessarily make the correlation. And the way that works, by example, is this. If you went to this room, say twice a week for 6 months to learn about meteorology, and then at the end of that 6 months, you're going to have a final exam. But not uncommonly, everyone else that was coming the other 2 days were coming here too. So if you all came to this room to take the test, the final exam, you cannot do that. Only half of you can be here and the rest have to be somewhere else. It turns out statistically that the people that can take the test in the room score better, whether they're the A students or not. And the people that didn't get to come back to the room score poorly. And that is because as you do anything in life day to day, there's basically a multi-track recorder, experiential recorder going on that associates information with place. It associates experience with place. It's all one thing in your database and it's all crisscrossy wired. Um, and it's both what makes humans really cool and unique, and but when it's ignored, it's not the best. These are guys I was working with on a project, and this is their work table, why they were trying to sort out a real particular problem. And the story for this is that they made pretty significant headway in about 3 weeks. And then somebody who pays the bills came by and said, there's a client coming, you're going to have to clean all this up. It can't be this way because, as you can tell, they are also hunched over and not at the correct height because this is a makeshift workspace. The idea was just to knock out the problems, get the prototypes made, and move on. And it sort of just drug on and on. So they did what they were asked, and surprise, when they went to go back the next day to work and they put things back on the table and tried to set up again, they really lost ground. They had documented things and made notes like we all would, but they definitely lost mental ground, like where were we? And I'm sure you've noticed this in your own lives, where if it's usually a good time to clean up when a project's done, not halfway through a project. It's usually a good time to move to a new location to think when there's actually a new topic, not midstream in a topic. And that logic holds really true when you're creating things on your own. You have complete control over this, unless somebody doesn't like messes. But it's very important to just have that awareness in the back of your head that where this stuff is on this table is of great significance. Though, if you ask anyone, just like if you ask a child if they could clean up their room, they're not going to have a great explanation for why something should or shouldn't be moved. But intuitively, we all know that if you start messing with this, the organic kind of terrain that happened here is going to sabotage the person's thought process. Um, and my machine is unhappy. Oops. Let's try it again. Sorry. It's not letting, here we go, and there we go. And that, sorry, by way of correlation, is a lot like growth rings in trees. I don't claim to know how to read them, but the gist of it is that the length of the season and the length of the cold and warm, the stuff that was in the air, the stuff that was in the ground, all that information is in here. But a lot of people will just look at this and say, that's a table or that's firewood. They don't read what's happening and really comprehend that this was sort of like a sediment in soil, that this is a architectural and physical record of what happened. They just say, that's wood. And a tabletop is kind of the same way with your stuff in it. The last topic here, let's see if we can wrap it up and leave time if people want to talk, is about learning and muscle memory. Muscle memory, of course, isn't actually in the muscle, it's in the wiring. But there's a couple things to note here. One is that everything, I put months on the bottom of this one, but that everything has this very similar progression where if it's a new topic, if there's novelty in a topic, say it's a new instrument, you've always played a sax, now you're going to play something not like a sax at all, a keyboard. Then even though the principles are the same and you have a common goal, your workload is going to be really high in the beginning and your ability to express yourself is going to be really low. Like interesting things will happen and you'll be happy about them, but the rest of the world might not be so impressed. But you'll quickly get to a point of proficiency, and it's where the green and orange lines start to cross. And here I put time, being completely hypothetical, but say a month and change, they've started to cross. You think something and then you're able to express yourself, but you're putting less work than you did when you started into actually playing, which is true literally of soldering, of working metal, of wood, of any material, and of any learning process. And you can see on the bottom there by the number 2 is the word malleable. There's a sweet spot after those things come together that you can pick up another instrument and have even a shorter, lesser learning workload because you've started to train the mind a little bit in terms of what's required to express versus learn. But what happens to people, as you will know if you have elderly people in your life or somebody who's done the same thing forever, is that as we move off to the right, you get, I call it work hardened because I have a background in metals, but basically you get mentally work hardened. And that is the cool part, the plus, is that you think something and it just seems like it happens. Like you don't think I need to do this to achieve this. You just have an idea and it comes out of the instrument. And you have almost no workload. It's like you could play forever. You're fine. But the problem with that then is that in that work hardened state, it's kind of hard to get on a different horse, metaphorically, or to switch up to something else unless it has a shared set of similar controls and features. And also, if something changes in that realm, you can become very attuned to like a gasket not working right, or this pot feels like it has a tiny bit of grit in it. And you're very, very, very attuned to it because it's this what you've, I'm sure, heard or feel or experienced, which is something becomes an extension of you. That's what happens on the right. But that's generally a good thing, not a bad thing. Uh, in terms of your own process, though, there's something to note there about scaling. In the blue, I just put complexity and novelty. If it is of high complexity, you just need to treat it accordingly. If it's very high complexity, it's best to divide it into sections. Show kind of metaphorical little machine down there on the bottom. And if the net output of all those controls is of complexity compared to what you're used to, compared to what you currently know, then it's best to do it in pieces, not do the entire thing. Subdivide it, learn that subdivision, then bypass that, learn the other subdivision, then put those two together. So that's like a kind of a management strategy, and just the expectation and the knowledge that some things you will have to chip away on slowly. Not everything can you be a master of in a short period of time. And I guess the last note on that is if you're making it yourself, then design it accordingly. Don't start by making a steep hill that's difficult to climb. Make progressions that you can work into. Uh, this was from a project quite a while ago, but it's just to make the point that turn signal stocks is something everyone basically ignores. But they have gone from the turn signal stock in the middle of the image, which only turns turn signals on and off, to the ones you see around that. Most of those are older, but it shows the point just the same. And all those are doing the exact same thing, but they all got organized by brand. And people use a brand and become brand loyal because of things like this. It becomes work hardened in their experience. And then when they get into the rental car or the other vehicle, they do the automated action and it doesn't do what they thought it would do. And then they dislike that brand. But really, what's happening is just physical conditioning and repetition. I have that with push as an example. I like this machine a lot. It's lovely, it's well made, it has never fit how my mind works, and I've tried multiple times. I use it plenty, but I do not use any of its depth because the way it's organized does not fit with how I learned and have now done things too long. So just to make that distinction, it is cool, but my brain does not fit it. And if you ever notice online where people buy, sell, and trade things, you will see a constant churn of people buying something and then selling it, buying something and then keeping it forever. And a lot of, especially in subcomponents or in Eurorack, that's because each of those were authored with a slightly different mindset, which may or may not correlate to other brands. Um, so, and that is in this category, of course, of learning and muscle memory. So there's two scales to think about here. One is your workspace. For some people, it's a place to practice and make stuff. For some people, it's both. Um, it's combinations, but is there a pattern of how you have distributed the devices in your workflow? I've noticed that one of the big pain points is that you may have a kind of a format that you practice to in a workspace, and then if you change locations, it's really important to replicate as much of those features in the place where you just went to, either help someone make more parts or play in public or whatever you're doing. Just be conscious of how things are oriented, because by manufacturer, there is not a lot of common standards. There's a lot of interesting and beautiful, cool things in the world. But just like guitar pedals that kind of come in from the right and go left, which is the opposite of certain languages, there's just things that if they sort of became standard by default, but they weren't necessarily organized as one. And I'm not saying that is one, but that's an example. versus I/O being on the backs of devices, stuff like that. And at the scale of your stuff, if you think in terms of test equipment or anything that has a modular quality to it, if you have more than one, essentially more than one outlay of that in more than one space, there should be some kind of correlation. And the correlation is not like not like a food recipe where it's like use this much flour, use this many eggs. It's what feels right and it's what feels effective. And you'll know the minute it's not, because you basically feel that static or that extra effort in your what you're trying to do. And there's the same thing with performance, but I mentioned that in the beginning. So just to touch on, there's a couple last thoughts here real quick to touch on that conditioning. When I saw modular electronics years ago, I felt as though probably like somebody who smelled baked bread or something. So like they went home to see their family. Like I felt so good when I saw a pile of patch cables. I couldn't, people were like, what? And I don't want to say I was in tears, but I was like very happy. And it wasn't until many years later when I was in a secondhand store that I saw this. And I went, oh, that has something to do with it. When I was very young, I wished and ended up having to chip into and forego other years of gifts in order to get this thing, which is a bunch of little springs on a cardboard kit to be able to put things together and change your mind. Surprise, that's a lot like this. And that familiarity got burned in at a lower level, and I essentially forgot about it until I saw this, which then leads to this thought. A lot of what I'm offering, or I guess suggesting, I'm pointing to here, are things to basically reduce drag. If both these cars have the same engine or burn the same amount of fuel over a distance, the silver one's going to go further. And it doesn't mean it's better or worse. It just means in your objectives of expressing yourself through creating things, building things, there's all these little subtle efficiencies. And at the level of mind and body, there's a lot of little things, not major ones. I mean, may feel major emotionally, but they're usually smaller. There's a lot of little things that can be tweaked to help your process. So every time you go to do something, it's not like the first time and doesn't have that steep curve like the green lines had. This is a sculpture, which is going to seem abstract. Well, it is abstract, but it's a sculpture that I did a long time ago. But the point of it is this is made out of steel. And when I first started doing this, you would beat on things like this for what seemed like an eternity, and they just looked horrid. The only reason I keep this image is because it reminds me that one day after working on it and working on it and working on it, I went, oh, hang on. And I started to do it a little more gently over a longer period of time. And I found that they could make metal do things that probably was never going to happen otherwise. And it just taught me a lot about patience. And it was just a self-taught thing that happened in life. I did not go anywhere to ask anyone. Is just a point of inspiration. And yeah, humans can't help humans. They can help each other to a point, but it is like the old adage, if you wanted to know something about water, despite the fact that that's where a fish is, they can't really tell you much. But we have huge potential within us. And I thank you for your time. And we have many time left. It looks like maybe we got a little bit of time left. We could do.
Yeah, we do. We do. Brian, that was awesome. There have been a lot of great comments.
Okay, cool.
I'm saving the chat. I just saved it for you.
Okay, great.
And I don't know. I would just ask maybe what I will do. I think people should talk. We need to hear from you.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great.
You got Brian here. Like, this is a treat. And what did you think? What did you guys think?
Hopefully that was.
What do we think?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I like it. Hi, everybody. My name is Ross. You know, I have 3 guitars, which probably represents the number of chords that I know after 40 years of hacking around with it, loving the Sex Pistols because I thought I could even emulate them. That was the encouragement. But you know what? I'm lazy. And so really the whole thing, and my daughter, who's a level 8 piano at Academy of Music, and she told me it's muscle memory. And I'm just too, I will try to get over being lazy doing it. And then somebody else made a comment, so I said, okay, I'm going to do muscle memory. And then the comment was one hand at a time, I think it was. I mean, work on this, and then work on this another time. And I've just been trying to do it all at once. And, and I amuse myself, but
that's worth a lot right there.
It is. That is. But I'd like to get better for my own amusement. Sure. So I just got to hunker down, right?
Yeah,
it's come like a gift from God, not to me.
It does to some, but a lot of it is it's being able to, that what you just described is the whole breakdown of it. It doesn't matter if it's a rack of complex analog synthing voices and stuff. It doesn't matter how many aspects there are. When you break them down, if you chunk them and then put them back together in pieces and actually kind of skip around and then go at it like, okay, easy. Just go at a natural pace, at a natural flow. That starts to come into sync with our biology, and it puts together in a meaningful way that holds up. Like you can drop it after a while and come back 6 months later, and surprisingly, there will be a fair amount there. If you do it that way. If you hit it hard and fast, it's like everything bounces off in terms of effort.
Okay.
So it's a lot about patience and chunking, breaking it
which
out.
is not one of my greatest virtues, but I'll give it a shot.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yes.
Because my daughter, who I said is level 8, sadly, she gave up playing piano a number of years ago because things got busy. And we unboxed a piano recently because we moved, and she sat down. And you know what? After probably 10 years, 2 kids later and stuff like that, it's coming back to her.
Yeah, sure.
Really quickly.
Yeah. The pathways, some pathways that have corollaries in our lives will get used. And there's an interesting thing about people, we can't identify that happening, but there are certain activities we might stay in touch with, and they don't have to literally be playing the piano, but they will keep some of those networks alive. And then revisiting that, depending on how long she did it for or how easy it came in the first place, then the whole thing kind of blooms, and it actually will grow in a slightly different way, just because that's the nature of biology. We're not the same humans we are today as we were in another time, or will be.
Okay, thank you. I really enjoyed this. It gives me encouragement, and I'm gonna do it.
Cool. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for checking it out.
Cool. Mac, I think you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Hey, this is a fascinating talk. I find myself with a similar number of arts as you have, and in many ways similar. I work in UX and product design. Yeah. I make instruments by hand. I write. I do graphics. And the thing I find challenging, and I wonder how you've mastered it, is not just focus on a project, but focus on a discipline even to express it fully, to go through it fully, because I will bounce from one thing to the next. I've got sort of a hummingbird mind about it.
Yeah, me too. So say a little more about that. You want to be,
I guess,
mastery over a single thing or mastery over multiples?
It's not so much looking for mastery as it is just looking for focus. And maybe it's that I need to become comfortable with, okay, I juggle a bunch of stuff kind of haphazardly and not very well, and that's cool. I don't know. How do you deal with going from one thing to the next fluidly and not feeling frustrated by having failed to spend enough time on one thing or having not made enough progress on another?
I see. So it's just me, but I tend to kind of work in these long arced loops where I will kind of, somewhat by happen chance say, this is where I need to be. And I will get very involved in something. And I will say largely it's a feeling, but I'll go to a point of reaching some kind of proficiency. And I'll kind of self-impose a little bit of discipline to say like, okay, yes, this is also extremely interesting based on what I just learned by doing this, but I'm not going to go there right now because I said I'm going to stay here. And I will quickly say too, I don't always stick to that because sometimes opportunity is too great to skip gears and go, this is a movie, not a song, you know, or just to change
Yeah.
media entirely. But I will say that I kind of punched my ticket on those and move on repeatedly until I come back around to the same stuff. So it just only recently happened where I kind of left something. I was in the public sculpture realm for a while, which is all metalworking and like mass scale fabrication, kind of engineering-ish kind of things. I mean, but rooted in the arts. And I sort of went, I ran into a number of issues, health-wise mostly, and I had to kind of park that for a while. But it's come back around in new forms. And then it was, I don't want to say it was like an investment, but some of what was involved there that seemed like a waste accrued enough to be born again in that discipline in a new form and feed the other ones to some degree, because I'm very much what you're saying. I totally vibe on where you're coming from. And then to actually bring a sense of ease almost incrementally to all of them. Not like, oh, this is a piece of cake, but like they all dropped like 4%, you know, or 2, just enough that I'm like, okay, good. And then I can again pick a new thing, and I can again go on and move in that big arc until one of them comes full circle, and I'm doing it again. Does that make sense? It's sort of this self-imposed discipline thing, I guess. I don't even know if that's the right way to do it. It's kind of what happens.
One more thing to share. I always liked Ben Franklin's schedule. So he had a very fixed schedule, arise, morning ablutions, take breakfast, go to the workshop, stop and write, all that kind of thing. Yeah. And he was a polymath and an extraordinary person. Yeah. And I've tried writing that schedule and I put it down. I don't keep it in front of me, so.
I know, I do too. That's why I'm saying it, but, and I'm totally serious and or genuine, but I'm the first to break my own rules. And I have like this kind of almost scary disarray where it comes to like filing. Like anytime I try to organize, I organize different every time. So when I go back to find something, it's like someone I don't know did it, and there's just stuff everywhere. That kind of makes enough sense, but it's not right really, and it's certainly not efficient. But I guess I try the hardest on the time spent in the disciplines and what it is I think I'm trying to achieve, or what it is I think I'm going after. Like, what's my motive? Like, why am I even doing what I'm doing? But yeah, the discipline's the hard part.
Yeah, very helpful. Thanks so much.